Hi, Niel Hiscox, publisher of Canadian Auto Dealer, here today with James Carter, principal consultant with Vision Mobility, and one of Canada's experts on emerging areas of shared mobility, alternate powertrain, and brings an interesting background in automotive, including a lot of work with Toyota to the table as he works with OEMs, dealers, and other industry players. James, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, Neil.
Give us a little bit of sort of broader detail on the areas you focus on, just so our audience has a sense of the context your comments are coming from.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So one of the things that we typically do is we focus on what I would consider the case technologies: connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. And going on from that, we want to have a look at what's happening with the platforms out there that make all these things possible. And then we have a look at the macro trends that really bring other things from outside the industry in and affect its direction. And we can see things like a long-term trend in shared, a long-term trend in people wanting to move from stuff to experience. So all of those sorts of things are coming together for a greater set of trends out there, and we like to weave all these together as part of the business that we do.
So leading from that, we've been doing an awful lot of industry conversations dealing with the impact of the pandemic on the business, on dealers, on OEMs. And obviously, out of necessity, a lot of that impact is very, very short term. Give us a sense of how you feel the pandemic is going to be impacting some of those trends you just spoke of, which obviously have been in place for a while, and it's a bit of a longer term view. How is this going to either catalyze or perhaps derail some of the trends you've seen in place?
Yeah, that's a good question, Neil. I think there's a couple points that I'd like to make. Firstly, when we have a look at change that happens in any industry, and I think this is really important, is that we tend to see disruption, we tend to see recession, and big shocks to the market really accelerate trends that are already there. Even if those trends tend not to, or even seem to have a reverse impact on an initial happening, long term there's more of an acceleration of that particular trend. And one of those trends, I think is really important that we'll see this in is particularly vehicle electrification. We've seen this moving and growing quite a bit of steam up until March this year. We've seen Tesla come in. We've seen market share growth for electric vehicles that has been very significant, and we've also seen a lot of players, including the government, really getting out there to support electrification and the rollout of the infrastructure that's needed. Even with the recession, even with now negative oil prices that we saw experience this week, I actually think that long-term electrification trend will continue. And I think one of the problems that the oil industry will face is this structural impact of this move towards electrification is going to continue. So their supply problem, demand supply problem that they had today, though maybe not as bad as they correct some of those problems on the supply side, long term I see that demand issues will tend to fall. Immediately after the post impacts of COVID-19, yeah, obviously I think there will be a pickup of the re-demand for oil, but long term I see this happening to accelerating that change change towards electrification.
Just dealing specifically on the price of oil, what we saw yesterday with a negative price for a barrel of oil, I've never, I think, seen that in my recollection. What do you think the impact of that is on consumer psychology? On the one hand, somebody may look at it and say, hey, this is fantastic. If oil is going to stay cheap, my F-150 is going to cost me that much less to operate. I suppose conversely, someone could look at it and say, that just doesn't make sense to me. It makes me uncomfortable about this as a platform to rely on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's a number of things that are playing into this. I think, especially in large cities, we're seeing people go, you know what, the air is clean. I wonder why. And there's a realization by many that hey, our transportation does contribute very significant pollution to the atmosphere and the air we breathe in. And we've already seen during COVID-19, those cities that have high levels of pollution have been naturally more prone to experiencing high levels of death through COVID-19, because it's a poor air quality causes respiratory problems. COVID-19 is particularly a respiratory problem in itself. So I think people are going to step back and say, well, I like this clean air. I'd like to do something about it. And I think we'll see from a government side too, there's more of an emphasis on, wanting to, promote cities with clean air. And one of the key ways that we can do that is move towards vehicle electrification, both on a light duty side, which, most of the Canadian auto dealers readers would come from, but also on a heavy duty side, trucks, buses. I see that as something that's really going to pick up, especially as the high power charging standards start to come through at the end of this year.
Does and you're absolutely right on the whole cleaner air piece. It's amazing how much coverage that gets, even in photographic essays I've seen in US papers and in European papers, where people are commenting, on being able to see a view they've never seen before, simply because the air is cleaner. Is the way that acts as an accelerator, is that going to give legislators a sense of empowerment or new momentum to try to push through regulatory changes? Yeah,
I think two things will happen. One thing is, we'll see this from a regulation standpoint, and for Canada, it's a little bit tied to whatever the US does, and obviously we have a administration in the US office that has been almost anti-change, or regressive in terms of it moving forward with pollution and fuel economy targets. However, politics does change. There could be a new government come in, and it could be completely different, from 6th of November onwards. However, from a Canadian side, I think one thing, and this will happen with other governments, particularly in Europe as well, we'll see an emphasis to trying towards kickstart the economy. And one of the things they can do with that is to roll out infrastructure projects. And infrastructure projects will obviously start to tilt towards things that A, they can do fairly quickly, and B, towards supporting policies that they already have in place. And we're already seeing the federal government roll out significant incentives both on high power electric vehicle charging to support electric vehicle charging in multi-dwelling units such as apartments and condos, and other emphasis to start rolling them out. So I think once the initial shocks got past, some of those projects will start to gain quite a bit more momentum and quite a bit more funding to really support that.
Where do you see, you're right, Canada by necessity will follow the US, or can only vary so much from the US. Where do you expect we're going to really see that leadership coming out of Europe, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. But, I think we'll also see it coming out even from our own consumers. I think one of the most important things, and this is what we found out when we conducted our 4th annual mobility study, we survey almost 6,000 countries, 6,000 people across 9 countries. And, one of the key things that we found out of that Canada is one of the key countries where it's I guess as people will consider a electric vehicle. So of those other European countries in the US and China and India, only India was just ahead of Canada. Canada was, by far the furthest ahead of the Western countries, as it were, in terms of people who would consider an EV for their next vehicle. So I think not only will you see the government drive it from an infrastructure and somewhat of a promotional level, you'll also see it being driven from consumers itself, and from the additional, waking up of the air quality and things like that.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the impacts to some of the existing players in the world of mobility. As I think I touched on, people coming out of this are probably going to be much more tentative about being in crowded physical spaces,
Totally.
surrounded by people they don't know. That certainly describes public transit. What do you think, or what have you seen in terms of the impact on public transit?
Well, obviously, public transit has taken a big hit, and frankly, anything that has some sort of shared or public component to it has taken a big hit during these times. I think in a longer term, it's probably going to be okay, and we'll see it recover. For many people in large cities, it is a primary form of transportation. I think the more interesting question is what happens in between transit and private ownership. That shared space. Today we see taxis, car sharing, Uber, other forms of shared transportation, and this area of in-betweenness has really exploded in the last 10 years as Uber and Lyft have really come in and taken a huge chunk of taxi shares business. We've seen car sharing grow. We've seen some of it come and go a little bit. But I think that in-between space is interesting. Certainly, we've seen rental car companies take a big hit as well. And we've seen articles about Hertz perhaps not having as much cash around as they would really want. However, I think this area really is right for generating new business models, and we've seen some business models kind of come and go. We've seen subscription come, and it's taken a small niche percentage of the market. Obviously, we've seen Uber do well. We've seen car sharing have another niche. But I think really it's right to really expand on this for dealers because, when we look at car sharing, it's not just like 5 people drive a car in one day. It could be a car sharing could also express itself in a micro lease where someone might come in and say they need a car, but they just can't afford to sign up for a car for a 3, 4, 5-year lease or to purchase it over 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So people are going to say, I can't afford to. I don't know where my next dollars are going to come from, but I need a car to do this particular job. For instance, that could be Instacart deliveries. It could be, other types of deliveries. And we've seen, in the US, some of the numbers I see was that, Instacart was looking to employ an extra 300,000 extra drivers in the US alone. As we see this shift from, people driving less to, bringing deliveries in. So what I'm almost saying is this demand has kind of shifted. And I think really dealers need to be open to what this demand looks like and what this demand brings. And that demand is going to be from people who are looking to jump into that industry. Typically, they may not have as much credit as they'd like to get into a vehicle. The job security may not be there, so they're going to need a vehicle that perhaps is A, costs less, and B, there's alternative forms of financing or being able to use that type of vehicle that are not necessarily offered currently.
That's interesting because to me that almost creates a whole new customer segment that potentially could be a very big one. I like the way you define that in-between space. So now we have to tell dealers they've got to become effective at servicing and selling and providing great customer experience to a subprime customer in between. Which is a different thing than the way we typically think of a subprime customer.
Yeah, typically, as subprime, you'd think of a subprime customer as, oh, let's try and get someone to finance that subprime customer who, takes subprime debt. But, let's not look at it like that. Just as you suggested, let's look at it more on a short-term basis. And most of those people have access to short-term credit, such as credit cards and other type of things like that, they can easily get into a vehicle for a week, 2 weeks, a month, and be able to pay for it on a credit card. And I think being able to circumvent those types of credit issues really could be a big bonus for a dealer who's looking to, generate some cash flow from the vehicles that they have on the ground today.
Quick question around technology, and I'm talking about sanitization technology. One of the things I'm amazed, and you gotta love, innovation never stops, and a crisis absolutely drives innovation. I'm finding my inbox filling up with devices, a little device not much bigger than a phone. You can put your phone in, it exposes it to UV light, and you end up with a sanitized phone. Presumably, there is going to be a real need to be able to demonstrate sanitized vehicles, whether it be for a test drive, for a rental fleet, whatever it is. There's going to be a need to demonstrate, hey, this vehicle is safe for someone to get into.
Right.
Is that a dealer opportunity where there could be, dealers have the advantage of service centers, and they have techs, they have all the fixed op infrastructure, that if they look to add some of this, they could actually potentially service a bigger a bigger market than just their own customers. They could service the local car rental fleets. They could service customers who want to sell a vehicle used but need to be able to demonstrate it's sanitized first. What do you think about that side of the tech opportunity?
Totally. I think, they're the types of new, business opportunities that, I'd be very much encouraging dealers to explore. And I think one of the things that we should think about in terms of shared mobility at dealerships, whether this is on a daily shared basis or as a weekly or monthly shared basis, the key point is that dealers have the ability to sanitize any vehicle they want today. Almost every dealership has a detailing center, and they can run that through. They can sanitize them properly. They can be done. This can be done today, and it happens today because they're still servicing vehicles. These things have to happen today. So when you take that almost competitive advantage that happens today, and say, how can I make the most of this? Then there's a whole bunch of other ideas, just like you suggested, whether it's, out there in the public, being able to properly sanitize a vehicle, or whether it's being able to, gain a real leg up in terms of, doing a rental or shared fleet out there to get customers out there, to get those subprime customers in. They don't have to worry about, what are the sanitization that's been prepared on the car, because it's already been done properly by someone who's been trained to do this. And perhaps one of the ways that dealers could do that is find some sort of sanitization dealer accreditation for that particular detailer, so that they know that they've been trained properly, and a dealership can point to that and say, look, this is what we do, this is our process, you don't have to worry.
When one starts to talk about certification and some kind of accreditation, makes me think on the OEM side. Let's talk a little bit about what the OEM participation is in this. It can be certified sanitized as a national brand accreditation.
Totally.
But let's also talk first about OEM participation in micro shared mobility. What are your thoughts there?
For sure. I think, we need to understand who distributors are, and distributors are really often just act like big dealers. They have many of the same challenges internally as that dealers do. They have the same cash flow issues that they have to balance. And we know that, basically they sell cars, basically they sell parts, and basically, they do marketing and have support staff just like a dealership does. And with that in mind, what the key advantage of the distributor is that they can leverage that dealer network to roll out, some really cool programs, such as the accreditation for, sanitization of vehicles, to make sure that they're clean and done properly, and in a way that, everyone understands what that means. And I think that that's a really, key and crucial advantage. But more than that, leveraging the distributor allows other forms of this new mobility, this shared mobility, to really take advantage of scale by operating centrally and then rolling out to the dealers. Like most of the larger dealers might have somewhere between 150 and 300 dealers out there in the Canadian market today. And that is a lot of, on-ground support and ability to, run a shared service. And, from that, you can greatly reduce the amortization cost of running a platform and the support staff that need it. And I think that's one real advantage that OEMs should be looking at, is being able to offer these short-term types of services, whether it's partnering through their financial arm, or just running it on their own. But this is a key opportunity that I think dealers should be targeting, this segment of the market, particularly for mainstream type brands.
You talk about the annual mobility study you're doing. I would imagine this is potentially adding a whole new set of questions to that study around consumer concerns around possible vector to infection, sanitization, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it will. I think that's going to be an interesting new element of the study that, obviously we've never considered before. Yeah. However, up until date, we had been measuring those shared trends. We had been measuring the trends of what people are thinking about their mobility today and their mobility tomorrow. But what we are seeing, particularly in the cities, is a trend towards people not wanting to purchase, particularly not wanting to own. So, there's a more tendency to want to lease, and there's a more tendency to want to do, short-term, less committed type leases, which is a general trend towards, I guess, a greater mobility, shared mobility thing in general. So, with that in mind, I think there's certain areas within our country that could benefit very much. And I think from shared mobility, from these trends of being able to share more, and dealers being able to support that sanitization to make sure it's properly clean, and particularly they are, a little more dense downtown areas such as, downtown Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, but even central Calgary, Edmonton, and some of the other cities could, Ottawa, for instance, could really, dealers there could really take advantage of such operations.
Is this going to create a greater differentiation between the characteristics of an urban market and a rural market than we have had in the past?
I think the short answer is yes, because the needs of rural customers and downtown city customers are different. We constantly hear about people saying, I live downtown, I don't need a car, or I live downtown, or we moved from the suburbs to more downtown area, we got rid of 2 of our 3 cars. And these are trends and ideas that we've seen happening, for a while. And people don't need the car because they can rely on public transport. They can pick up a car sharing car when they need it. They can catch Uber and Lyft quite cheaply. And all of these things, even when combined together, are quite significantly less than they're making for car payments anyway. We know that, a typical car payment, plus insurance, plus parking, plus maintenance, plus whatever else that you have to actually run a car, could easily be, $700, $800, $900 out of someone's pocket every month. So that's a huge expense, particularly if someone's not necessarily earning, huge money.
And presumably coming out of this, there's going to be a much bigger chunk of the economy that even if they've resumed employment, has a level of nervousness around the income stream.
Yeah, totally. And I think one thing we have seen shift over, quite a number of years is this trend towards this, gig economy, more people doing work like I do, like, independent consulting work. So I think that trend and that nervousness around, security in the future will also help towards a movement towards offering vehicle mobility that perhaps is less committed. So people have more flexibility in terms of what they can do with their mobility in the future.
Interesting. You mentioned, and we've touched on your mobility study. I would imagine some of the people listening to this might be interested in seeing it. How does one get a copy?
I'm happy. We'll just post the link at the end, and make sure to click on the link, and you can go through the PowerPoint presentation that we put together late last year. So our next one will be in December, the end of this year, that we'll show to everyone. This study is done with Curiosity CX, which is a boutique CX company, consumer studies company down in the US. And we also partner with the much larger LEK Consulting, which is a large global consulting company. So the three of us run that study together.
That's great. We'll make sure to get that link out to people. James, I think this was really interesting. I would imagine that we will be back and have a further look at how some of these trends are evolving and reshaping. But for now, I really appreciate the feedback.
Thanks very much, Neil. It's great to talk to you as always.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Neil.
Signing off for Canadian Auto Dealer.